I gotta do this first. This is a song that I just recorded, and it's an old song called Unchained Melody. I had to play the piano, so it'll take just a second.
Elvis Presley, the legendary king of rock and roll, had a dazzling career that spanned decades, but his final performance was anything but glamorous. In new footage that has been uncovered after years of being hidden away, Elvis can be seen struggling to perform on stage, his face a mask of agony and his body racked with pain. This disturbing footage exposes a rarely seen side of the iconic singer, revealing the toll that fame and drug addiction had taken on his health and well-being. What events occurred in the recent footage? Join us to find out. The Legend and the Burden. The year was 1977, and Elvis Presley's world had grown smaller, quieter, and heavier than ever before. The man once called the king of rock and roll was fading before the eyes of those who loved him. His voice still carried the magic that once shook arenas, but his body could barely keep up with the rhythm that had defined his life. Every day seemed to drain a little more of the fire that once burned so brightly inside him. Yet no matter how tired or sick he felt, he refused to give up the stage. It was all he had left, the only place where he still felt alive. In his final year, Elvis looked nothing like the young man who had dazzled the world in his gold suit and flashing smile. The sharp features that once made hearts race were now hidden behind layers of weight and fatigue. The sparkle in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a kind of sadness that never seemed to leave. His once smooth voice sometimes trembled, his breathing grew short, and he often needed help to get through a show. The years of endless touring, prescription drugs, sleepless nights, and personal pain had taken their toll. But even as his body betrayed him, his spirit tried to fight back. Elvis's health was in steady decline. He suffered from high blood pressure, liver problems, and chronic pain. His diet was poor, and he relied on medication to sleep, to wake up, and to keep performing. His weight fluctuated, his face looked swollen, and his movements were slower than before. Behind closed doors, he struggled with insomnia and anxiety, often pacing the halls of Graceland at night while the world slept. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt deeply alone. Fame had given him everything, and taken almost everything else away. There was a quiet kind of heartbreak in Elvis's life at that time. His marriage to Priscilla was long over, and although they remained on good terms, the loss still haunted him. He adored his daughter, Lisa Marie, and she was one of the few things that could bring light to his days. But most of the time he was caught between the pressures of the past and the emptiness of the present. The applause that once thrilled him now felt distant, as if he were chasing a ghost of himself on every stage he stepped on. Colonel Tom Parker, his longtime manager, saw things differently. To him, the show had to go on, no matter what shape Elvis was in. There were tours planned, tickets sold, and money to be made. Elvis, too, felt a strange duty to continue. He didn't want to disappoint his fans, the same people who had lifted him from obscurity and crowned him their king. Even when his body was aching and his mind was foggy, he dragged himself to rehearsals, determined to give them one more show. Sometimes he would collapse in exhaustion after performances, but the next night he would be back under the lights again. His friends and band members began to worry. They saw the changes that others refused to admit. His memory seemed to slip at times. His hands shook when he tried to hold the microphone. He would laugh suddenly, then fall into deep silence. The sparkle of joy that used to light up rehearsals was gone, replaced by a heavy sadness that no one could quite reach. Some days, he would isolate himself completely, shutting out even the people closest to him. The mansion that once rang with music and laughter now felt quiet and heavy, filled with memories that only deepened his loneliness. Doctors who checked on him gave warnings, urging rest and medical care, but Elvis brushed it all aside. Deep down, he feared that stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant letting go of everything he had built. Music was his last thread to the world. It was where he could still be the man everyone remembered. On stage, even for a few moments, he could forget the pain, the pills, and the exhaustion. The lights, the crowd, the songs, they still gave him something no medicine could, a sense of purpose. As the days passed, those closest to him began to sense something different about him. He would sometimes stare into space, lost in thought, as if he were already somewhere far away. When he sat at his piano, his fingers moved slowly, his voice softer, filled with a sorrow that went beyond the lyrics. There were times when he seemed to be saying goodbye without using words, moments when his smile carried a strange kind of sadness. The pressure around him only grew. The schedule was relentless, the expectations never-ending. Colonel Parker continued to plan more shows, ignoring the signs that Elvis was near his breaking point. The king's body was giving out, but the machine of fame kept running. Each night before going on stage, he would take deep breaths, sometimes needing help to stand straight. The people around him could see the pain in his eyes, but he kept pushing forward, convincing himself that this was what he was born to do. There was something haunting about the way Elvis carried himself in those final months. It was as if he knew time was running out, but didn't want anyone to see his fear. His life had become a performance in itself, one last act of endurance, one final attempt to hold on to the crown that fame had given him long ago. Behind the music, there was a man desperate to keep the dream alive, even as everything inside him began to fade. And so, as the date of his final show drew near, a quiet tension filled the air. Everyone close to him felt it, a strange mix of anticipation and dread. No one said it out loud, but deep down they knew this performance might not just be another concert. It might be the last time the world would see Elvis Presley, not the legend, but the man, a man still trying to shine, even as the light within him flickered dangerously low. What really happened on his final show? Stay with us. A strange calm before the storm. The morning sun rose gently over Graceland, spreading a soft golden glow across the white columns and quiet gardens. But inside the mansion, the air felt heavy, almost frozen in time. The king of rock and roll was still asleep long after his usual hour, his curtains drawn tight against the light. The house that once echoed with music and laughter was eerily silent, as if it sensed that something was about to change forever. When Elvis Presley finally stirred, the clock was creeping toward noon. He sat up slowly, his head heavy, his body drenched in sweat. His skin looked pale, almost colorless, and his eyes seemed tired beyond words. The room around him was perfectly still, just the faint hum of the air conditioner and the muffled sound of footsteps outside his door. He reached for a glass of water beside his bed, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted it. The king, once so full of strength and charisma, now looked fragile, weighed down by exhaustion and pain. His nurse knocked softly, stepping in to check on him. She asked if he wanted breakfast, but he only shook his head. A few moments later, Ginger Alden, his girlfriend, appeared in the doorway with a small smile. She noticed how pale he looked and asked if he was feeling all right. He told her not to worry, insisting that he just needed a little more rest. Those words, spoken so calmly, would later echo in the memories of everyone who heard them that day. Elvis moved slowly through his morning routine, pausing often as if every movement required great effort. His breathing was uneven and his steps unsteady. In the mirror, he barely recognized the man staring back. The reflection seemed older than 42, worn down by sleepless nights, endless pressure, and the weight of his own fame. Yet deep inside, he still clung to the thought of performing again. The stage was the only place that made him feel alive, and tonight, he was scheduled to do just that. After dressing, he made his way toward the music room. The house remained unusually quiet, the staff speaking in hushed tones. There was a strange calm in the air, like the moment before a storm. Elvis sat at his piano, his hands resting gently on the keys. For a while, he didn't play. He just sat there, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Then slowly, his fingers began to move. A few soft notes filled the room, broken and haunting. He played a gospel tune he loved since childhood, his voice faint but full of feeling. Those nearby could hear it drifting through the halls, a lonely, trembling sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. After playing for a while, he opened his Bible. He turned through the pages, stopping here and there, reading in silence. It was a quiet moment of reflection, almost as if he were preparing himself for something beyond the night ahead. For those who saw him that morning, there was something different about him. Not just tiredness, but a kind of peace that felt strange, almost unsettling. Later in the day, a few members of his staff tried to encourage him to rest before the concert. He smiled faintly, but brushed off their concerns. His voice was weak, but his determination remained. He told them he would be ready. Despite his shaking hands and shallow breaths, he began to prepare, carefully choosing the outfit he would wear that night. It was white with gold details, the kind of suit that reminded everyone of his glory days. But when he tried it on, it hung loosely on his frame. His body had lost much. As evening approached, Graceland's halls buzzed softly with preparation. The limousine was ready, the band already waiting at the venue. But there was unease in the air. Some of his crew whispered that he didn't look well enough to perform. Others said he appeared ghostly, his eyes distant, his face drained of color. His doctor quietly suggested canceling the show, but the idea was quickly dismissed. The king never canceled. In one corner of the room, a small camera had been set up by a crew member capturing bits of behind-the-scenes footage. This tape, long unseen by the public, would later become the most haunting piece of Elvis's final days. In it, Elvis can be seen standing just behind the curtain, moments before stepping on stage. His eyes are blank, his posture uncertain. He sways slightly, as if trying to steady himself. The people around him glance nervously, unsure whether to help or to step back. His face glistens with sweat, and for a moment he appears lost, not just in thought but in a place far away from everyone else. Then the sound of the crowd swells. The stage lights flash. He takes a deep breath, straightens his back, and forces a faint smile. The performer in him awakens one last time, but those watching closely can see the truth, the effort it takes just to move, to smile, to stand under those lights. The man who once commanded the stage with effortless power now seemed to be fighting against his own body, pushing through pain that few could imagine. As he steps forward into the light, the crowd erupts in cheers. They see their hero, the king, alive and ready to sing again. But behind the curtain, a sense of dread lingers. His staff exchange worried looks, aware that something is deeply wrong. They can only hope he makes it through the night. That footage, rediscovered years later, would leave those who saw it speechless. It showed not just a performer, but a man nearing the end, his body fragile, his spirit still fighting. The calmness of that day at Graceland was no ordinary calm. It was the quiet before a storm that no one could stop. It was the final breath of peace before the world lost its king forever. The final performance. The lights inside the arena dimmed, and a restless hush swept through the crowd. For a few seconds there was nothing but the hum of excitement and the soft crackle of microphones being tested. Then, as the band struck the opening notes, the room exploded with cheers. Thousands of fans rose to their feet, screaming his name, waving their hands, and holding up flashes of cameras. They had come to see their idol, the king of rock and roll. None of them knew that this would be the last time they would ever see him perform alive. Elvis Presley stepped onto the stage slowly, his white jumpsuit glittering beneath the bright lights. For a moment it looked as though time had turned back, but when he came closer to the microphone, the truth was clear. His face was swollen and pale, his eyes heavy and distant. The weight of his body seemed to press down on him, each movement slower than before. The spotlight made him sweat almost instantly, tiny drops running down his forehead as he blinked against the brightness. He raised his hand to greet the crowd, managing a faint smile, though his body looked tired and unsteady. As the music began, his voice trembled slightly. The first few lines sounded weak, almost fragile. Yet the crowd cheered louder, willing him to find his strength again. And somehow, for a brief moment, he did. As the song continued, his voice grew deeper, fuller, and more alive. It was as if the spirit of the young Elvis had returned, filling the room with warmth and nostalgia. The fans cheered through tears, remembering the man who once changed music forever. But behind that moment of power, something darker lingered. In the newly discovered footage from that night, the camera zooms in on his eyes. They tell a story the audience could not see, eyes distant and haunted, eyes carrying pain too deep to hide. Even as he smiled, there was a sadness behind it, a quiet knowing that this performance might be his last. The sweat rolled down his face, but it wasn't just from the heat. He was fighting exhaustion, his breath coming in short gasps between verses. Midway through the show, small things began to go wrong. He forgot a few lines, paused too long before the next verse, and at one point stumbled slightly as he turned toward the band. The musicians glanced at each other, worried but professional. They kept playing, covering his hesitation with stronger music. Elvis tried to push through it, nodding at them weakly. His fingers shook as he adjusted the microphone, and when he reached for a towel to wipe his face, his hand seemed to tremble uncontrollably. The crowd, at first, didn't notice. To them, the shaking hands and unsteady movements looked like part of his emotion, part of the magic of Elvis being real. His sentences drifted and trailed off. He swayed gently at times, his knees seeming to buckle before he caught himself. The band played louder, hoping to pull him back into rhythm. For the fans sitting near the stage, the sight was unforgettable. Some clapped harder, trying to encourage him, shouting his name again and again. Others grew quiet, their faces filled with concern. A few began to cry, sensing that they were watching not just a performance, but a farewell. Then came the final song of the night, one that had always touched his heart. "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" The arena fell completely silent as the music began. His voice, cracked and trembling, filled the room with a sadness that no one could explain. Every word seemed heavy with meaning, every note soaked in emotion. His lips quivered as he sang, and though he struggled to keep his balance, he didn't stop. It sounded less like a performance and more like a confession. When he reached the final line, his voice broke slightly, and a tear rolled down his cheek. The crowd, unaware of the full truth, rose to their feet, giving him a long, roaring applause. Elvis stood there for a few seconds, staring into the sea of faces. Then he lowered his head, gave a weak nod, and walked off the stage quietly. There was no big ending, no curtain call. He moved backstage slowly, as if each step took great effort. The cheers faded behind him, swallowed by the silence of the hallway. In his dressing room, the atmosphere was tense. His staff watched him closely, whispering among themselves. He looked confused, his face still pale and drenched with sweat. He sat down heavily on a chair, breathing hard, staring at the floor without speaking. A few people tried to ask if he was all right, but he barely responded. His doctor, already worried for weeks, suggested they postpone the next shows, but Colonel Tom Parker quickly dismissed it. The tour, he said, had to continue. As the others slowly left, Elvis remained behind, alone in the quiet room. He took off his heavy stage belt and laid it beside him. His hands shook as he reached for a towel, wiping his face gently. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, his eyes empty and tired. The moment stretched on, just him, the silence, and the faint hum of the lights above. Later, that same night, a small camera captured what no one was meant to see. In that final piece of unseen footage, Elvis sits slumped in his chair, whispering softly to himself. His lips move slowly, his expression unreadable. Some say he was praying, others believe he was simply too tired to speak. The clip is short and grainy, but it carries an unbearable sadness. Struggle, denial, and fate. When the lights went out after that final show, the roar of the crowd faded and the curtains closed. Elvis Presley returned to Graceland carrying more than exhaustion. He carried the weight of years of pain, loneliness, and silent suffering. The king of rock and roll had given everything he had on that stage, but behind the mansion's gates, the truth of his condition became impossible to hide. At Graceland, the once joyful home was quiet and cold. The laughter that once filled its halls was gone. Elvis spent most of his days locked away in his bedroom, curtains drawn, the world outside slowly slipping away from him. His body was weak, but it was his spirit that seemed truly broken. The energy that had once electrified stadiums now flickered like a dying flame. Each night grew longer than the one before. Sleep never came easily, and when it did, it came through the help of pills. Too many of them. His doctors and aides tried to adjust his medications, but the pattern had already taken hold. The man who once commanded thousands on stage could barely find peace in his own bed. His diet worsened, his appetite fading between bursts of unhealthy cravings. He tried to eat, to stay strong, but his body could no longer keep up. Friends and family noticed the change immediately. Some came by to check on him, hoping to lift his spirits. They found him smiling faintly, insisting he was fine, though his eyes told a different story. They were dull, distant, and tired. He avoided long conversations, and when he did speak, his words came slowly, as though every sentence took effort. Still, deep inside, Elvis refused to give up. There were moments when he would suddenly decide to record again, a spark of the old determination breaking through the darkness. He would walk into the studio, dressed in his familiar white jumpsuit, trying to reclaim the fire that once made him unstoppable. But those sessions were painful to watch. His voice, though still beautiful, cracked under strain. He could no longer reach the notes that once came effortlessly. The emotion was still there, but it carried a haunting sadness, as if every song was a farewell, Those around him began to whisper in worry. His health was failing, his energy nearly gone, but he kept denying the truth. He spoke of tours, of future plans, of new projects, as if speaking them out loud would make them real. Yet everyone knew fate was moving closer, step by step. The atmosphere in Graceland was heavy, filled with quiet tension and unspoken fear. Then came the morning of August 16, 1977. Calm, still, and eerily peaceful. The house was unusually silent, the kind of silence that feels unnatural. When Elvis didn't appear at his usual time, a sense of dread began to rise. Moments later, he was found unconscious in his bathroom. Panic erupted through the mansion. Staff members shouted, phones rang, and desperate attempts were made to revive him. But it was too late. The king of rock and roll was gone, just 42 years old. Outside, the world seemed to stop. The news spread faster than anyone could believe. Radios switched to his songs. Television stations interrupted their broadcasts. Newspapers printed his name in bold headlines that broke hearts everywhere. Fans gathered outside Graceland, crying, praying, some refusing to believe what they had heard. As the sun set that day, millions played his music, their tears falling to the sound of his voice. And for those who had seen his final performance, the truth became painfully clear. That trembling voice, those distant eyes, and that fragile goodbye song, it had all been his farewell long before anyone realized it. Elvis Presley had sung his last goodbye not with words, but with his heart. When the footage was released, the world was in shock. So what did the footage reveal? Let's find out. The footage resurfaces. Decades after that haunting night in 1977, when the world lost its beloved king of rock and roll, a discovery brought his final moments back to life in a way no one expected. Hidden deep within old archives, a piece of footage from his last performance was uncovered, uncut, restored, and heartbreakingly clear. The video, once thought to be too damaged to view, was brought back to light through modern technology. When it was released, it felt as if time itself had reopened a wound that never truly healed. The restored footage showed the full truth of that night, not the glamorous image often painted by memory, but the raw, unfiltered reality of a man struggling against his own fading strength. The lights of the stage glowed brightly, but they did little to hide the exhaustion in his eyes. Every movement, every step, seemed to take immense effort. His face was swollen, his skin pale under the glare of the spotlight. Yet, even in that fragile state, there was something deeply human, something both painful and beautiful. When the footage was first shown to the public, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans who had adored him for years sat in silence, watching their hero fight to finish his songs. Some wept, others turned away, unable to bear the sight of how much he had suffered. Many admitted that seeing him like that changed the way they thought about him forever. They realized that behind the fame, behind the glittering stage costumes and the cheers, Elvis had been carrying an unbearable burden, one he never fully shared with the world. Social media platforms were filled with messages of shock, sadness, and deep respect. Younger generations who had only seen his polished performances were stunned by how fragile he looked. To them, this wasn't just an entertainer at the end of his career. It was a man standing between glory and collapse, refusing to give up. Fans described it as watching a candle burn to its very end, shining brightest just before the flame went out. Music historians and experts began analyzing every second of the performance. They spoke about the tragic beauty within it, the way his voice, though weakened, still carried incredible emotion. His gestures, though slower, still reached out to the audience with warmth and sincerity. Some said it was one of the most moving performances ever captured, not because of perfection, but because of honesty. It revealed a man stripped of illusion, giving what little he had left to those who loved him. Members of his old band who were still alive were invited to see the footage. Many couldn't hold back their tears. They remembered being on that stage, feeling the tension in the air, sensing something wasn't right. Seeing it again after so many years brought all those emotions flooding back. They spoke quietly afterward, saying it felt like they were standing beside him again, watching him give everything he had, even when his body could no longer keep up. The footage soon became more than just a recording of a concert. It turned into a symbol, a mirror reflecting the pain, dedication, and humanity behind the legend. It showed that even in his darkest hour, Elvis Presley's love for his music and his audience never faded. He may have been weak in body, but his spirit still shone through every note, every word, every trembling smile. For fans around the world, the rediscovered video was both heartbreaking and comforting. It hurt to see him in such a state, yet it reminded them of his deep devotion to performing. It was as if he had left behind one last message, not of despair, but of endurance. He showed the world that true greatness is not just in power or fame, but in the courage to keep going even when everything hurts. As the final moments of the footage play, his voice trembling through the closing song, his eyes distant but full of feeling, viewers sense the weight of history pressing down. It is no longer just a concert, it is a farewell, caught on film, preserved through time. The rediscovered footage stands as a final testimony to Elvis Presley's spirit, the man who gave his heart until it could give no more. And as the screen fades to black, it leaves behind a silence so deep it feels almost sacred. What do you think about the new footage? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more celebrity gist. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.